The first sensation Marcus Chen experienced was not pain, but the absence of it. For what felt like an eternity, his consciousness had been suspended in a void where time meant nothing and sensation was a forgotten concept. Now, warmth crept through his limbs like liquid fire, awakening nerve endings that had been dormant for longer than he could comprehend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. His fingers twitched first, then his toes, each movement sending cascades of tingling awareness through his body. His mouth tasted of copper and something chemically sweet, as if he had been drinking metal dissolved in honey. The flavor clung to his tongue within a persistence that made him want to spit, but his throat felt too raw and unused for such a simple action. When he tried to open his eyes, brilliant white light stabbed through his eyelids like heated needles, forcing him to squeeze them shut again with a groan that sounded foreign to his own ears. "Patience, human Marcus," came a voice from somewhere above him, melodic yet strangely layered, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect harmony. "Your biological systems require time to readjust. You have been in suspended animation for a considerable duration." Marcus forced his eyes open again, more slowly this time, allowing the harsh illumination to gradually fade into manageable brightness. Above him loomed a face that belonged in no human anatomy textbook. The creature's skin was a pale blue-green, smooth as polished stone, with delicate silver markings that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury beneath the surface. Its eyes were large and luminous, a deep violet color that held depths Marcus couldn't fathom. Where a human would have hair, this being had what appeared to be crystalline formations that caught and refracted the light into prismatic patterns. "What happened to me?" Marcus managed to croak, his voice barely more than a whisper. His throat felt like sandpaper, and each word was an effort. The alien leaned closer, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and blooming flowers. "I am Healer Zephyros of the Ethereal Collective. You were discovered in a derelict human vessel drifting in the Veil Nebula. Your cryogenic systems were failing, and you were mere hours from death when our scouts found you." Marcus tried to sit up, but gentle hands pressed him back down. These hands, he noticed, had 6 fingers each, long and graceful, with what looked like small gems embedded in the fingertips that pulsed with soft light. "Where am I? What ship were you talking about?" "You are aboard the Harmony's Gift, one of our medical vessels," Zephyros explained, his voice maintaining that peculiar multitonal quality. "As for your ship, it was the engineering transport Prometheus, registered to the Terran Colonial Authority. Do you remember anything about your mission?" The name hit Marcus like a physical blow, and suddenly fragments of memory began reassembling themselves in his mind. He was Senior Systems Engineer Marcus Chen, assigned to the Prometheus as part of the Titan Station construction project. They had been carrying revolutionary new terraforming technology to the Outer Rim colonies, equipment that could transform dead worlds into garden paradises in a fraction of the usual time. But there had been an attack, pirate raiders hitting their convoy near the edge of explored space. "The pirates," Marcus said, the memories flooding back now. "They hit us hard. Captain Morrison ordered all non-essential personnel into the emergency pods. I was supposed to stay with the terraforming equipment, but the reactor was going critical. Someone had to manually initiate the emergency containment protocols." Zephyros nodded solemnly. "The radiation from your ship's reactor failure was severe. The cryogenic pod likely saved your life by slowing your cellular processes enough to prevent immediate death from exposure." "How long was I out there?" Marcus asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. The healer's luminous eyes seemed to dim slightly. "According to our chronological calculations, approximately 300 standard years have elapsed since your ship's distress beacon was first activated." The words struck Marcus with the force of a meteor impact. 300 years. Everyone he had ever known was dead. His wife Elena, his daughter Sarah, his parents, his colleagues, his friends. All of them were gone, reduced to dust while he slept in his frozen tomb. The weight of that realization settled on his chest like a massive stone, making it difficult to breathe. "I know this is overwhelming," Zephyros said, his voice taking on a gentler tone. Temporal displacement is one of the most traumatic experiences any sentient being can endure. We have seen it before with other survivors from various species. Other survivors? Marcus asked, latching onto that single word like a drowning man grasping for driftwood. Indeed. The ethereal collective has made it our sacred mission to preserve the remnants of civilizations that face extinction. We maintain sanctuary ships like this one throughout the galaxy, offering refuge to the last members of dying species. You are not alone in your displacement, Marcus Chen. Before Zephyros could explain further, the chamber door slid open with a soft whisper, and another figure entered. This newcomer was clearly of the same species as the healer, but where Zephyros had an air of medical precision, this being radiated authority and wisdom. The silver markings on their skin formed more complex patterns, and the crystalline formations on their head were larger and more elaborate. "Ah, our human has awakened," the newcomer said, their harmonic voice carrying notes of genuine warmth. "I am Archon Celestine, commander of this vessel and coordinator of our regional preservation efforts. Welcome to your new life, Marcus Chen." Marcus struggled to process the implications of those words. Preservation efforts? What do you mean by that? Celestine moved closer, their movements flowing like water. The galaxy has changed much in the centuries since your time, human. Many species that once thrived have fallen to various catastrophes. Wars, plagues, natural disasters, the collapse of their home stars. We of the ethereal collective have dedicated ourselves to ensuring that no culture, no knowledge, no unique perspective is lost forever. But humans aren't extinct, Marcus protested, though even as he said it, a cold dread began forming in his stomach. Earth still exists, doesn't it? The colonies? The two ethereals exchanged a look that Marcus couldn't interpret. Perhaps it would be better if you rested first, Zephyros suggested. The shock of awakening is considerable, and adding more trauma to your system could be dangerous. No, Marcus said firmly, finding strength he didn't know he possessed. I need to know. What happened to humanity? Celestine was quiet for a long moment, those violet eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that was both comforting and unsettling. Earth survives, they said finally. But humanity as you knew it no longer exists. A great plague swept through human space approximately 2 centuries ago, one that targeted the specific genetic markers of unmodified humans. Those who survived did so only by accepting radical biological modifications that changed them into something new. The room began to spin around Marcus, and he gripped the edges of his medical bed to steady himself. What kind of modifications? The survivors are no longer technically human, Zephyros explained gently. They call themselves the Neo-Terrans now. Silicon-based neural implants, synthetic organs, genetic alterations that allow them to survive in environments that would kill unmodified humans. They are a remarkable species in their own right, but they are not the humans you once knew. Marcus felt something inside him break at those words. Not just everyone he loved, but his entire species was gone. He was truly alone, a relic from a dead civilization. How many others like me are there? You are the 47th unmodified human we have found, Celestine said. We maintain a small community of your people on our primary sanctuary world, Elysium Prime. They have helped us catalog and preserve the vast cultural heritage of pre-plague humanity. 47, Marcus repeated numbly. Out of how many billions? The exact population of human space at the time of the plague is uncertain, Zephyros said, but our estimates suggest approximately 40 billion individuals across several hundred worlds. The magnitude of the loss was incomprehensible. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to imagine it. 40 billion lives snuffed out by a plague that had somehow spared only a handful. The weight of survivors' guilt crashed down on him like an avalanche, and for a moment, he could barely breathe. I understand this is difficult to process, Celestine said, their voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. But you must understand how precious you are, Marcus Chen. You carry within you the memories, the knowledge, the authentic perspective of humanity as it truly was. That makes you invaluable to our preservation efforts. Preservation efforts, Marcus repeated, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. You mean like a museum exhibit? Not an exhibit, Zephyros corrected quickly, a living repository of knowledge and culture. Our preserved individuals work with our scholars to document their civilizations in perfect detail. Music, art, literature, scientific principles, social customs, religious beliefs, everything that made their species unique. And in return? In return, you live in comfort and safety, Celestine said. You are provided with everything you need, surrounded by others who understand your displacement, and given the opportunity to ensure your people's legacy lives on for all time. Marcus nodded slowly, though something about the arrangement felt wrong in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Can I see them? The other humans? Of course, Celestine said. But first, you must complete your medical recovery. Healer Zephyros will monitor your progress over the next several days, and once you are physically stable, we will arrange for you to meet your fellow survivors. Over the following days, Marcus gradually regained his strength under Zephyros's careful supervision. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The healer was attentive and knowledgeable, administering treatments that seemed to work on principles far beyond anything Marcus remembered from his time. The medical bay was a marvel of technology, with walls that seemed to be made of living crystal that pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns. Diagnostic equipment that operated without any visible controls, responding to the healer's thoughts or subtle gestures. During his recovery, Marcus learned more about the ethereal collective and their mission. They were an ancient species, having achieved interstellar travel millennia before humans had even developed agriculture. Their entire civilization was built around the concept of harmony, the idea that all life in the galaxy was interconnected, and that the loss of any species diminished the whole. We have saved representatives from over 3,000 species, Zephyros explained during one of their sessions. Some were refugees from natural disasters. Others were the sole survivors of wars or plagues. Each one brings a unique perspective to our understanding of the universe. 3,000 species, Marcus mused. That's an incredible number. How do you manage to care for so many different types of beings? Each preservation world is carefully designed to meet the specific needs of its inhabitants, the healer said. Climate, atmosphere, gravity, radiation levels, everything is adjusted to create optimal living conditions. Some species require methane atmospheres. Others need high radiation environments. We accommodate them all. Marcus found himself impressed despite his grief. The ethereals seemed genuinely committed to their mission, and their technology was clearly advanced enough to make good on their promises. Still, something nagged at him, a feeling that there were questions he should be asking but wasn't. On his 4th day of recovery, Celestine returned with news. Your fellow humans are eager to meet you, Marcus. They have prepared a welcoming celebration in your honor. The transport to the human habitat was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Instead of a traditional shuttle, they traveled in what Celestine called a, quote, harmony pod, a spherical vessel that seemed to phase through the hull of the medical ship without creating any breach. The technology was so far beyond human engineering that Marcus couldn't even begin to understand the principles involved. As they traveled, Celestine pointed out various features of their sanctuary ship. The Harmony's gift was massive, easily the size of a small city, with multiple habitat sections designed for different species. Through the pod's transparent walls, Marcus caught glimpses of alien environments that defied description. Gardens that grew in zero gravity with plants that looked like living jewels. Vast aquatic sections where bioluminescent creatures swam through liquid that wasn't quite water. Atmospheric processors that created localized weather systems within enclosed spaces. Your people live in Section 7, Celestine explained. We've recreated several different Earth environments there, from temperate forests to desert oases. Each individual can choose the setting that brings them the most comfort. When they arrived at the human section, Marcus was struck by how normal everything looked. Rolling green hills dotted with familiar trees, a clear blue sky overhead complete with moving clouds. Even the smell of the air reminded him of Earth. If he hadn't known better, he might have believed he was home. A group of people waited for them near a cluster of comfortable-looking buildings that could have been transplanted from any human colony. As Marcus stepped out of the Harmony Pod, he was immediately struck by how healthy and content they all appeared. Their clothes were well-made and fit perfectly, their faces were bright with genuine smiles, and they moved with the easy confidence of people who had found their place in the world. "Marcus," called out a woman with graying hair and kind eyes. "Welcome home. I'm Dr. Sarah Voss, though I suppose we're beyond professional titles here. I was a xenobiologist before. Well, before everything changed." A tall man with dark skin and a warm smile stepped forward next. David Park, former colonial administrator. "Been here about 15 years now, and I can honestly say it's the most peaceful time of my life." One by one, the other humans introduced themselves. Engineers, doctors, artists, teachers, farmers, people from every walk of life, who had somehow survived the Great Dying. They welcomed Marcus with an enthusiasm that was both touching and slightly overwhelming. "Come on," said a younger woman named Lisa Chen, no relation despite the shared surname. "We've prepared a feast in your honor. Real Earth food prepared the way our grandparents used to make it." The meal was extraordinary. Somehow, the ethereals had managed to preserve not just the genetic templates for Earth crops and livestock, but the authentic flavors and textures that Marcus remembered from his childhood. The bread tasted like his mother's homemade loaves, the meat had the exact smoky flavor of his father's barbecue, even the wine was perfectly aged and complex. As they ate, the other humans shared their stories. Most had been found in similar circumstances to Marcus, preserved in emergency pods or cryogenic chambers after various disasters. A few had been rescued from failed colony ships, others from research stations that had suffered catastrophic accidents. Each had awakened to find their old world gone and their species transformed beyond recognition. "The hardest part was accepting that we couldn't go back," Dr. Voss explained. "I spent the first year trying to convince the ethereals to take me to one of the Neo-Terran worlds. I thought maybe I could adapt, maybe I could find a place among humanity's descendants." "What changed your mind?" Marcus asked. "I saw the recordings," David Park said quietly. "The ethereals showed us what the Neo-Terrans had become. They're barely recognizable as human anymore. Most of their bodies are artificial, their minds are linked to vast computer networks, they don't even reproduce biologically anymore. They create new individuals in laboratories, custom designed for specific functions." Lisa nodded sadly. "They're not evil or anything like that. They're actually quite successful as a species. But they're not us. We're the last humans, Marcus. The real humans, I mean." "The ethereals understand that," Dr. Voss added. "They've given us everything we need to live comfortably and to preserve our culture. We have libraries full of human literature, art galleries with works spanning thousands of years, concert halls where we perform music from every period of human history." Marcus listened to their stories and tried to match their enthusiasm, but something felt off. These people seemed almost too content, too accepting of their situation. "Don't any of you ever feel like prisoners here?" he asked carefully. The question caused an uncomfortable silence to fall over the group. Finally, David Park spoke up. "We're not prisoners, Marcus. We're free to go anywhere on the ship, to pursue any interests we like. The ethereals provide for all our needs and treat us with nothing but kindness and respect." "But can you leave?" Marcus pressed. "If you wanted to travel to other worlds, see the galaxy, what would happen?" Another uncomfortable pause. "Why would we want to leave?" Lisa asked. "This is our home now. Our purpose is here, preserving human culture for future generations." Dr. Voss leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Marcus, I understand your confusion. We all went through the same questions when we first arrived. But you have to understand, there's nowhere else for us to go. The galaxy has moved on without humanity. We don't fit into the new order of things. Here we're valued and protected and given a meaningful role to play." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Marcus found himself distracted by what had been said, and, more importantly, what hadn't been said. None of them had actually answered his question about leaving. They had deflected it, redirected it, but never directly addressed whether they were free to go. After the meal, Dr. Voss offered to show him the cultural preservation facilities. They were impressive beyond description. Vast archives containing every piece of human literature ever written, including works that had been thought lost for centuries. Art galleries that showcased paintings, sculptures, and multimedia works from across human history. Concert halls were perfect holographic recreations of famous musicians performed for audiences of preserved humans and visiting ethereals. The ethereals spare no expense in maintaining our heritage, Dr. Voss explained as they walked through a recreation of the Louvre Museum. They've even created perfect copies of artworks that were destroyed in various wars and disasters. How do they know what they looked like if they were destroyed? Marcus asked. Their historical research capabilities are beyond anything we ever achieved, she replied. They can extrapolate missing information from quantum resonance patterns, recover data from molecular-level traces, even reconstruct events by analyzing gravitational wave distortions. Marcus was impressed despite himself, but something about the explanation bothered him. If the ethereals had such advanced historical research capabilities, they must know far more about the plague that destroyed humanity than they had told him. Why would they withhold that information? That evening, Marcus was given quarters in a building designed to look like a comfortable Earth-style home. The furnishings were perfect reproductions of early 22nd century human design. The food dispenser was programmed with thousands of authentic human recipes, and the entertainment system contained the complete cultural output of human civilization. As he sat in his new living room, surrounded by all the comforts of home, Marcus felt more isolated than he had in his medical bed. Everything was perfect, too perfect. It felt like living inside a museum diorama labeled Early 22nd Century Human Habitat. He was beginning to understand why the other humans seemed so content. When everything you needed was provided, and every comfort was anticipated, it became easy to stop asking difficult questions. But Marcus was an engineer, and engineers were trained to ask difficult questions. They were trained to look for problems, to find flaws in systems, to understand how things really worked rather than how they appeared to work. And the more he thought about his situation, the more questions arose. Why had it taken 300 years for someone to find his ship? The Prometheus had been traveling a well-established trade route when it was attacked. Even if the initial search and rescue efforts had failed, someone should have detected the distress beacon long before the ethereals arrived. How had the plague that destroyed humanity been so specifically targeted? Biological weapons were notoriously unpredictable. Yet this one had somehow killed only unmodified humans while leaving the modified ones untouched. That level of precision suggested either incredible luck or deliberate design. Why were there only 47 human survivors out of 40 billion? Even the most catastrophic plague in Earth's history had never achieved a mortality rate that high. There should have been isolated populations, remote colonies, someone who had natural immunity or access to effective treatments. And most importantly, why did the ethereals seem so invested in preserving dead cultures rather than preventing their extinction in the first place? With their advanced technology and vast resources, they could surely have intervened to save at least some of the 3,000 species they now kept in preservation. Marcus lay in his perfectly comfortable bed that night, staring at a ceiling designed to look exactly like the one in his old apartment on Mars Colony 7, and tried to convince himself that he was being paranoid. The ethereals had saved his life and given him a home when he had nowhere else to go. They were preserving human culture in ways that would have been impossible without their help. He should be grateful. But gratitude was a luxury that engineers couldn't always afford. Sometimes the cost of not asking difficult questions was too high to pay. The next morning, Marcus began what he told everyone was an effort to contribute to the preservation project. He volunteered to help catalog human technological achievements, starting with the terraforming equipment he had been transporting when his ship was attacked. It was a logical contribution, given his expertise, and both the humans and ethereals seemed pleased by his initiative. What Marcus was really doing was conducting an investigation. He started by accessing the ship's databases to research the terraforming technology he had been carrying. The Prometheus had been transporting prototype atmospheric processors that could transform a dead world into a garden paradise in just 50 years, compared to the traditional time frame of several centuries. It was revolutionary technology that would have changed the economics of colonization forever. But according to the ethereal databases, no such technology had ever existed. Human terraforming capabilities were listed as primitive and slow, requiring hundreds of years to achieve marginal results. There was no mention of the breakthrough discoveries that had made Marcus's cargo possible. Either the ethereal's historical research wasn't as comprehensive as they claimed, or they were deliberately suppressing information about human technological capabilities. Marcus decided to test which possibility was correct. He requested access to technical specifications for the Prometheus itself, claiming he wanted to contribute information about human starship design to the cultural archives. The ethereals were happy to provide what they had. Their records showed the Prometheus as a standard cargo hauler with conventional fusion drives and basic life support systems. But Marcus knew better. The Prometheus had been equipped with experimental quantum tunnel drives that could achieve faster-than-light travel without the massive energy requirements of traditional hyperspace generators. It was technology that should have revolutionized space travel. Again, there was no mention of these capabilities in the ethereal databases. Marcus began to form a hypothesis, one that made his blood run cold. What if the ethereals weren't just passive observers who happened to find dying civilizations? What if they were actively involved in creating those extinctions? The terraforming technology Marcus had been carrying would have made human expansion across the galaxy exponentially faster and cheaper. Colonies could have been established in star systems previously considered uninhabitable, spreading humanity across a much wider area and making extinction-level events far less likely. The quantum tunnel drives would have given humans the ability to travel between star systems in days rather than months, making rapid evacuation possible during emergencies and allowing for more robust trade and communication networks between colonies. Both technologies would have made humanity far more resilient as a species. And both technologies had somehow been erased from the historical record. Marcus spent the next several days carefully probing the other humans about their backgrounds, trying to determine if any of them had been involved with advanced technologies that were now mysteriously absent from ethereal records. He had to be subtle about it, framing his questions as part of the cultural preservation work. What he discovered was deeply disturbing. Dr. Voss had been working on quantum biology research that could have led to treatments for previously incurable genetic diseases. Her work was nowhere to be found in the databases. David Park had been overseeing the construction of self-replicating mining stations that could have made resource extraction incredibly efficient and cheap. No mention of such technology existed. Lisa Chin had been a specialist in neural interface design, working on systems that could have enhanced human intelligence and problem-solving capabilities. The ethereals seemed to have no knowledge of her field. Every single human survivor had been involved with revolutionary technologies that could have made their species more successful, more resilient, more capable of surviving and thriving in a hostile galaxy. And every single one of those technologies had vanished from the historical record. The pattern was too clear to ignore. The ethereals weren't preserving the remnants of randomly extinct civilizations. They were collecting the survivors of targeted extinctions, species that had been eliminated specifically because they were on the verge of major technological breakthroughs. But why? What possible motive could the ethereals have for preventing other species from advancing? Marcus decided he needed to learn more about the ethereal collective itself. He requested access to their historical and cultural databases, claiming he wanted to understand his benefactors better. Celestine seemed pleased by his interest and granted him broad access to their archives. What Marcus found there shook him to his core. The ethereal collective was indeed ancient, but their early history told a very different story than the peaceful preservation mission they promoted. Millions of years ago, the ethereals had been an aggressive expansionist species that conquered and enslaved dozens of other civilizations. They had built a vast empire that spanned multiple galactic arms, with countless slave species working to fuel their expansion. But their empire had eventually collapsed when their slave species had developed advanced technologies that allowed them to rebel successfully. The war that followed had lasted thousands of years and devastated entire star systems. When it was over, the ethereal empire was gone, their slave species were free, and the ethereals themselves had been reduced to a handful of survivors. According to their own records, that catastrophic defeat had led to a philosophical transformation. The ethereals had embraced the concept of harmony, dedicating themselves to preserving life rather than destroying it. They had spent the next million years rebuilding their civilization around peaceful principles. But Marcus noticed something troubling in the timeline. The ethereal preservation mission had begun exactly when other species in the galaxy were starting to develop technologies that could pose threats to established civilizations. Faster-than-light communication, universal translators, quantum manipulation, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, all the tools that could allow a young species to challenge older, more established ones. The 3,000 species in ethereal preservation weren't random victims of bad luck. They were potential competitors who had been eliminated before they could become threats. And now Marcus understood why he and the other humans were really here. They weren't honored guests or preserved cultural treasures. They were trophies, living proof of the ethereal's success in eliminating another potential rival. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't been destroyed by a random plague. They had been murdered by the ethereals, probably through some kind of targeted biological weapon that left only a few scattered survivors. Those survivors had then been rescued and brought to live in comfortable captivity, where they could never again pose a threat to ethereal dominance. Marcus sat in his perfect replica of a human living room, surrounded by the preserved cultural artifacts of his dead species, and felt a rage unlike anything he had ever experienced. The ethereals had committed genocide on a scale that defied comprehension, wiping out not just humanity but thousands of other species, and they had convinced their victims to be grateful for the privilege of living in their killers' museums. But Marcus was still an engineer, and engineers didn't just identify problems, they solved them. He began to plan. Marcus spent the following weeks acting the part of a grateful survivor, while methodically gathering intelligence about the ethereal collective's operations. His engineering background proved invaluable in understanding their technology, much of which operated on principles that human science had only theorized about. The harmony pods used quantum phasing to move through solid matter, the habitat generators manipulated local spacetime to create artificial environments, and their data storage systems existed partially outside normal dimensional space. But every technology had weaknesses, and Marcus was determined to find them. His first breakthrough came when he volunteered to help maintain the human habitat's environmental systems. The ethereals were pleased by his initiative, viewing it as another sign of his successful integration into their preservation program. They granted him access to the control systems without hesitation, trusting that a properly conditioned survivor would never abuse such privileges. What Marcus discovered was that the habitat's environmental controls were connected to the ship's primary networks through quantum entanglement channels. Every adjustment he made to temperature, humidity, or atmospheric composition was instantly recorded in the central databases. More importantly, those same channels could be used to access other ship systems if one knew how to navigate the quantum encryption protocols. Marcus did know how. The terraforming technology he had been transporting had used similar quantum networking systems, and he had helped design the security protocols that protected them from unauthorized access. The ethereals had apparently studied human technology extensively before deciding to eliminate it, but they had missed some of the more subtle aspects of quantum encryption. Over the course of several nights, Marcus carefully probed the ship's networks through the environmental control access points. He was cautious to leave no traces of his activities, routing his queries through legitimate system maintenance requests that would appear normal to any monitoring software. What he found was a treasure trove of classified information about ethereal operations throughout the galaxy. The collective maintained over 200 preservation ships like the Harmony's Gift, each one carrying survivors from dozens of extinct species. But these weren't random rescues as they claimed. The ships were strategically positioned to monitor developing civilizations across the galaxy, watching for signs of technological advancement that could pose future threats. When a species reached certain milestones in their development, usually involving faster-than-light technology, advanced artificial intelligence, or quantum manipulation capabilities, the ethereals would intervene. They had dozens of different methods for causing extinctions. Engineered plagues were popular for biological species. Solar destabilization worked well for civilizations dependent on single star systems, and carefully orchestrated wars could eliminate species that were too distributed to be destroyed through environmental disasters. The human plague that had supposedly wiped out unmodified humanity was designated as Project Tabula Rasa in the ethereal databases. It had been specifically designed to target the genetic markers of baseline humans while leaving the modified variants alive. The Neo-Terrans weren't humanity's descendants who had survived through adaptation. They were the ethereal's insurance policy, a neutered version of humanity that posed no threat to anyone. The more Marcus read, the more horrified he became. The ethereals had been committing genocide on an industrial scale for millions of years, and they had convinced themselves that they were performing a noble service. Their internal communication spoke of preventing unnecessary conflicts and, quote, maintaining galactic stability and, quote, preserving cultural diversity through controlled extinction events. They genuinely believed they were the heroes of their own story, but Marcus also found something else in the databases, something that gave him hope. The ethereals were not as invincible as they pretended to be. Their empire was vast but thinly spread, with only a few million individuals controlling thousands of star systems. They relied heavily on automated systems and artificial intelligence to manage their operations, which created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone who understood their technology. More importantly, they had grown complacent. After millions of years of successful extinctions, they no longer expected resistance from their preserved survivors. Their security protocols were designed to prevent escape, not sabotage. They had never imagined that one of their museum pieces might try to fight back. Marcus began to formulate a plan that was audacious beyond anything he had ever attempted. He wasn't just going to escape from the Harmony's gift. He was going to turn it into a weapon against its creators. The first step was to identify the ship's critical systems and understand how they could be manipulated. The quantum drive that powered their faster-than-light travel was protected by multiple redundant safeguards. But those safeguards assumed that any potential saboteur would be trying to disable the drive, not weaponize it. The harmonic resonance generators that maintain the artificial environments could be repurposed to create destructive interference patterns. Even the preservation pods where thousands of cultural artifacts were stored could be converted into kinetic projectiles if launched at sufficient velocity. But Marcus knew he couldn't accomplish his goals alone. He needed allies, and that meant convincing at least some of the other preserved humans to help him. The problem was that most of them seemed genuinely content with their situation. Years or decades of comfortable captivity had conditioned them to accept their roles as living museum exhibits. Marcus decided to start with Dr. Sarah Voss, the xenobiologist who had shown the most curiosity about the larger galaxy during their conversations. He approached her carefully, framing his questions as academic interest in ethereal society. "Sarah, you mentioned that the ethereals have been studying extinction events for millions of years. Have you ever wondered why so many species seem to go extinct, just as they're developing advanced technologies?" Dr. Voss looked up from the biological samples she was cataloging, her expression thoughtful. "It is an interesting pattern, isn't it? I've noticed it too. Almost like there's some kind of natural barrier that prevents species from advancing beyond a certain point. Or an artificial one," Marcus suggested quietly. She frowned at him. "What do you mean?" Marcus glanced around to make sure they were alone in the laboratory, then leaned closer. "Sarah, what if the extinctions aren't natural? What if someone is causing them deliberately?" "That's impossible," she said immediately. "Who would do such a thing? And why?" "Someone who benefits from keeping the galaxy stable and predictable," Marcus replied. "Someone who doesn't want competition from younger, more innovative species." "Doctor?" Voss stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see the gears turning in her mind. She was a scientist, trained to follow evidence wherever it led, even if the conclusions were uncomfortable. "You're talking about the ethereals," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded. "I've been accessing their databases through the environmental control systems. Sarah, they're not preservationists. They're exterminators. They've been systematically eliminating every species that shows signs of technological advancement." "That's impossible," she repeated. But her voice lacked conviction this time. "They saved us. They gave us homes and purpose." "They gave us comfortable cages," Marcus corrected, "and they only saved 47 humans out of 40 billion. Does that sound like a successful rescue operation to you?" Dr. Voss sat down heavily in her chair, her face pale. "Show me," she said. Marcus had prepared for this moment. He had carefully extracted key pieces of evidence from the ethereal databases and stored them in a secure partition of the environmental control systems. Over the next hour, he showed Dr. Voss the truth about Project Tabula Rasa, the systematic elimination of technological species, and the ethereal collective's true history as galactic conquistadors. When he finished, Dr. Voss was crying. "All those people," she whispered, "my colleagues, my students, my family, they were murdered." "Yes," Marcus said gently, "and so were the families of every other preserved individual on this ship. "We're not honored guests, Sarah. We're trophies." "What can we do?" she asked. "We're trapped on their ship, surrounded by their technology, completely dependent on them for everything." "We fight back," Marcus said. "And we make sure this never happens to another species." Dr. Voss wiped her eyes and looked at him with a mixture of fear and determination. "What do you need me to do?" Over the following days, Marcus and Dr. Voss carefully approached the other humans, sharing the evidence of ethereal genocide with those they judged most likely to help. The reactions were mixed. Some, like David Park, refused to believe the evidence even when presented with irrefutable proof. Others, like Lisa Chen, were horrified but too frightened to consider resistance. But a core group of 8 humans eventually agreed to help with Marcus's plan. They included Dr. Voss, an engineer named Robert Kim who had worked on fusion reactor design, a former military officer named Janet Torres who understood combat tactics, and several others with useful skills. Marcus also reached out to preserved individuals from other species, though this was more challenging due to language barriers and cultural differences. However, he found that the concept of revenge was surprisingly universal. A crystalline being called Resonance of Ancient Storms had lost its entire species to an engineered stellar collapse. A methane-breathing creature known as Void Walker Between Stars had watched its homeworld die from a manufactured plague that turned their atmosphere toxic. Each preserved individual had their own story of loss and betrayal, and each brought unique capabilities to Marcus's growing resistance movement. The plan Marcus developed was complex and dangerous, requiring precise timing and flawless execution. The goal was not simply to escape from the Harmony's gift, but to seize control of the ship and use it to expose the ethereal collective's crimes to the entire galaxy. The first phase involved systematically disabling the ship's security and monitoring systems. Marcus and his allies used their legitimate access to various ship systems to plant logic bombs and backdoor programs that would activate on command. Dr. Voss introduced carefully designed biological agents into the air circulation system that would render ethereals unconscious without harming the preserved individuals. Robert Kim prepared to overload the ship's power distribution network, creating cascading failures that would force the ethereals to focus on damage control rather than security. The second phase called for capturing key ethereal personnel, particularly Archon Celestine and the ship's senior officers. With hostages in hand, Marcus's group could force access to the ship's primary command systems and communication arrays. The final phase was the most ambitious. Marcus planned to use the Harmony's Gift's quantum communication system to broadcast evidence of ethereal genocide to every inhabited system in the galaxy. But more than that, he intended to provide the technical specifications for weapons and defenses that could be used against ethereal technology. The preserved individuals represented thousands of extinct civilizations, and among them were the remnants of technologies that could threaten even the ethereal's advanced capabilities. The crystalline being Resonance of Ancient Storms possessed knowledge of harmonic weapons that could shatter ethereal quantum shields. The Porshing stars understood toxic chemistry that could poison ethereal life support systems. A dozen other preserved individuals carried pieces of the puzzle that, when combined, could provide younger species with the tools they needed to defend themselves. Marcus knew that executing his plan would likely mean death for himself and his allies. The ethereals would not allow such a massive security breach to go unpunished. But he also knew that failure to act would condemn countless other species to the same fate that had befallen humanity. On the night they had chosen for their rebellion, Marcus lay in his perfectly recreated human bedroom and thought about his wife Elena and daughter Sarah. They had died believing that he would somehow find them, somehow make everything right. He couldn't bring them back, but he could ensure that their deaths had meaning. At exactly 0300 ship time, Marcus activated the environmental control override he had spent weeks preparing. Throughout the Harmony's Gift, the air circulation system began dispensing Dr. Voss's biological agents. The ethereals would fall unconscious within minutes, giving the resistance fighters the window they needed to act. Marcus slipped out of his quarters and moved through the darkened corridors toward the ship's command center. Behind him, other members of his team were making their way to their assigned targets. Resonance of Ancient Storms was heading for the quantum drive chamber, its crystalline form nearly invisible in the low light. Void Walker Between Stars flowed through the ventilation shafts toward the life support control room. Everything depended on timing and stealth. If even one ethereal managed to raise an alarm before the biological agents took effect, the entire plan would collapse. Marcus reached the command center to find two ethereal guards already unconscious at their posts. He stepped over their sleeping forms and began working on the access controls, using the security codes he had extracted from the ship's databases. The door slid open with a soft whisper, revealing the bridge of the Harmony's gift. The command center was a work of art, all flowing curves and crystalline surfaces that pulsed with soft bioluminescent patterns. But Marcus had no time to appreciate the aesthetics. He moved quickly to the central command console and began the process of accessing the ship's primary systems. The quantum communication array came online first, its massive dish arrays rotating to align with transmission nodes throughout the galaxy. Marcus uploaded the evidence packages he had prepared, terabytes of data documenting ethereal genocide and the true fate of the preserved species. The transmission would take several minutes to complete, during which time he would be completely vulnerable. As the upload progressed, Marcus activated the ship's internal sensors to check on his team's progress. Dr. Voss had successfully reached the medical bay and was downloading detailed information about the biological weapons used in various extinction events. Robert Kim was in the engineering section, preparing to overload the power distribution network if the ethereals attempted to regain control. Janet Torres had secured the armory and was distributing weapons to the other resistance fighters. Everything was going according to plan. But Marcus knew that the most dangerous part was yet to come. The biological agents would only keep the ethereals unconscious for a few hours at most. When they woke up, they would discover that their carefully maintained facade had been shattered and their crimes exposed to the galaxy. The quantum communication system chimed softly, indicating that the first wave of transmissions had been completed. Evidence of ethereal genocide was now spreading across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds, reaching news networks, government agencies, and military commands on thousands of worlds. But Marcus wasn't finished. He activated the ship's weapons systems and began targeting other ethereal preservation ships in the local cluster. The Harmony's gift was equipped with planet-cracking armaments designed for stellar engineering projects, but they could be just as easily used for destruction. One by one, Marcus locked onto the quantum signatures of nearby ethereal vessels. Each ship contained thousands of preserved individuals from dozens of extinct species, living trophies of successful genocide campaigns. The moral weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him like a physical force, but he knew there was no alternative. The first ship died in a brilliant flash of antimatter annihilation, its quantum drives overloading in a cascade failure that consumed the entire vessel in seconds. The preserved individuals aboard never knew what hit them, but their deaths served a purpose. Each destroyed ship was one less tool in the ethereal arsenal, one less symbol of their dominion over the galaxy. Marcus destroyed 7 more preservation ships before the survivors managed to coordinate a response. Alarm signals began flashing across his command console as ethereal military vessels converged on his position. He had perhaps 10 minutes before they arrived in sufficient force to overwhelm the Harmony's gift's defenses, but 10 minutes was enough to complete his mission. Marcus activated the ship's quantum drive and set course for the heart of ethereal space, where their primary command centers and cultural repositories were located. The Harmony's gift was a massive vessel, easily the size of a small moon, and it carried enough antimatter to sterilize an entire star system. If he could reach the ethereal homeworld and detonate the ship's power core, the explosion would destroy their central government and cripple their ability to continue their genocide campaigns. The ship lurched into quantum space, reality blurring around it as it traveled faster than light toward its target. Behind them, ethereal pursuit vessels scrambled to follow, but they were too late. The Harmony's gift had a significant head start, and its modified drive systems gave it a speed advantage that Marcus had carefully calculated. As they raced through the quantum void, Marcus sent one final transmission to the galaxy at large. It was a simple message, broadcast on every frequency and in every language his database contained. This is Marcus Chen, formerly of the Terran Colonial Authority, speaking for the 47 surviving unmodified humans and all the other preserved individuals aboard the ethereal vessel Harmony's gift. We have discovered the truth about the ethereal collective and their so-called preservation mission. They are not saviors or peacekeepers. They are genocidal killers who have systematically eliminated thousands of species to maintain their own dominance. The evidence we have transmitted contains proof of their crimes, along with technical specifications for weapons and defenses that can be used against their technology, we call upon every free species in the galaxy to unite against this threat before you become their next victims. We go now to strike at the heart of their empire, knowing that we will not survive but hoping that our sacrifice will give others the chance to live free. Remember us not as victims, but as the ones who chose to fight back. End transmission. The journey to the ethereal homeworld took 6 hours, during which Marcus and his team made their final preparations. They had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes, exposing the collective's crimes to the galaxy and providing other species with the tools they needed to defend themselves. But they knew that their own story was nearing its end. When the Harmony's gift dropped out of quantum space near the ethereal homeworld, they found a massive defense fleet waiting for them. Hundreds of warships surrounded the planet, their weapons charging for a coordinated strike that would reduce the hijacked preservation ship to atoms. Marcus smiled as he watched them prepare to fire. The Ethereals still didn't understand what they were facing. They thought this was just another desperate escape attempt by their preserved specimens, not recognizing the engineered quantum resonance cascade that Marcus had spent the entire journey preparing. When the ethereal weapons fired, their energy beams struck the Harmony's gift's modified shields and were absorbed, converted, and redirected back at their sources with amplified force. The effect rippled outward through the quantum matrix that connected all ethereal technology, creating a feedback loop that grew stronger with each passing second. Ship after ship in the defense fleet suffered catastrophic power failures as their own weapons turned against them. The planet's protective shields collapsed as their generators overloaded. Even the ethereal homeworld's massive city ships began falling from the sky as their anti-grav systems failed. And at the center of it all, the Harmony's gift held together just long enough for Marcus to complete his final act of vengeance. He triggered the ship's antimatter containment failure manually, overriding every safety system and protocol that might have prevented the detonation. The explosion that followed was visible from neighboring star systems, a new sun that burned for 3 days before finally fading to darkness. When it was over, the ethereal homeworld was gone, their central government was destroyed, and their empire was thrown into chaos. Across the galaxy, younger species who had received Marcus's transmissions began building the weapons and defenses he had provided. The collective's remaining forces found themselves facing organized resistance for the first time in millions of years as their former victims turned their own technology against them. It would take years to fully dismantle the ethereal empire, and the preserved individuals on the remaining ships would likely not survive the process. But Marcus had given the galaxy something far more valuable than his own life or the lives of his fellow survivors. He had given them hope, and the knowledge that even the most powerful oppressor could be defeated by those with the courage to fight back. In his final moments, as the antimatter explosion consumed everything around him, Marcus thought once more of Elena and Sarah. They would never know what he had accomplished in their memory, but somewhere in the quantum echoes of their dying ship he felt their presence. He had kept his promise after all. He had found them, and he had made everything right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.